Welcome to the Fire Nuggets Framework Podcast with Jay Bonnifield and me, Nick Papa. Our intent is tapping into expertise to capture tangible fireground takeaways. By interviewing experienced professionals, we aim to extract their tacit knowledge and intuitive judgments to provide you with a better understanding of the fireground and actionable insights to apply to your next fire. For the 5th episode, we are joined by our guest, Phil Jose, a retired deputy chief from the Seattle, Washington Fire Department, where he served in both the shift commander and training chief roles. Chief Jose is internationally known for teaching the next generation of the art of reading smoke. A passion project of his, and what we will be discussing today, Chief Jose has been researching tactical decision-making games, or TDGs, for the fire service. Welcome to the show, Chief.
Hey, Nick and Jay, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. It's always fun to talk about tactical decisions and making them and having fun doing it.
Pleasure's all ours. All right, so to kick this off, Chief, can you explain what TDGs are and their origins?
Yeah, so the origins go all the way back. A lot of your audience, maybe I'm dating myself, but I think Halo is still a video game. You have red versus blue, and that's apparent in a lot of like video games and stuff. But that concept of red versus blue goes all the way back to the Prussians and Clausewitz and some of the military thinking, more than a century. Those colors of red and blue is something that they used when they were doing tactical decision games to train military commanders. Fast forward to the mid 80s, a guy named John Schmidt, who some of the audience might know. He's a Marine, and he wrote he wrote some doctrine for the Marine Corps. So if anybody in the audience has read Warfighting, and if you haven't, you probably should. But John wrote that, and then he started writing tactical decision games for the Marine Corps Gazette. Though they were published. Any Marine who read the Gazette could put in an answer, then they would publish them. Of course, this is the back in the ink and paper era, but they would publish those the next month with the solutions and some of the rationale and that sort of thing. And so it's just a way to accelerate learning. So that's sort of the history of where they come from. I got involved with John. I became a big student of how decisions are made. When I got promoted to lieutenant in the late 1900s, as I'm fond of calling it now, when I made lieutenant, I was just like, wow, I have to make a lot of these big decisions, and there wasn't much of a training curriculum in the Seattle Fire Department at that time, and so I just started to do a bunch of reading and came upon Gary Klein, and that introduced me to naturalistic decision making or recognition prime decision making. And so that sort of got my journey going there, which led me to John Schmidt, which then he invited me to participate in some tactical decision games he was doing online for ROTC midshipmen who were both Navy and the Marines, but the Marine Corps guys and gals were getting ready to graduate, go to the basic school, and then be deployed into the Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's obviously very serious business. And as soon as I saw them doing them, I was like, I could do these for the fire department. So I started doing them. I had already been doing a bunch of tactical decision-making stuff. I just hadn't I was doing them in a way, but hadn't put all the pieces together. And so I started doing them in earnest online, and that sort of led me to Jay's been in some of my sessions, but it just led me to create the curriculum and then start to think about how to spread that word widely. So that's the origins as far as tactical decision games themselves and how I got sort of interested in them.
All right. No, Jake, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things when it comes to TDGs, and this was a big part of my growth process and learning the value of them, was what is different about a TDG from a kind of traditional fire service simulation, right? A lot of folks they'll have experiences with sim labs of different kinds, and like, what is it that makes a TDG different from a sim lab? I think that's probably when the light bulb popped for me. That was it was that realization that this is different than the sim lab. So what is it that makes them different?
Yeah, I think and that's what I've always loved about them. Yeah, they're low cost, they're low risk, they're relatively low fidelity. So one of the things that people pursue, and you often find in sim cell environments where people are putting together a $10 million sim lab, or even a $1 million sim lab, um, is that there's a lot of complexity there, right? You have the projectors and all, you have all of the stuff that you need to be able to put together. And the reality is that when we talk about the fidelity of the exercise, how real it feels or how real it is relative to the training value, the transfer of information, the ability of the student or students that are involved in the thing to take home real lessons, there's almost no relationship. The research shows, and I got a study sitting here on my desk. I could hold it up, right? The scientific research shows that there's only a very limited return on physical fidelity. What you want is cognitive fidelity. You want the types of decisions, the types of pressure, you want those sorts of things to feel real to the participant when they're doing it. And the lift to create cognitive fidelity is very, very low. So drawing a picture on a whiteboard of a two-story house with the fire coming out of the basement or floor one or floor two or the attic, putting some, draw some lines with streets, draw, say the hydrants, 300 feet this way, or put a blue H in the corner, on the corner of the street on the northeast corner of the, or how, whatever's normal in your area, and just say, hey, you're first in, you're arriving, this is your fire, what are you going to do? And so it's that simple. And you can make it a little more complex, and if you go into the online environment, it's you need just a tiny bit more complexity. But people, the natural tendency is to believe that a more rich physical environment, a physical environment that feels real, it adds a lot of value. But the evidence is it's actually contrary for new people to any domain. If you make the simulation environment too rich, it actually distracts from their learning. It's detrimental to their ability to absorb the base information they need to get started on their journey. And so the nice thing about tactical decision games is the simplicity, the repeatability, the you don't need any, it's low cost, you don't need any permission from anybody to do this. If you're interested right now going, hey, I'm a company officer and I'd like to try this, nobody's going to stop you, man. You don't need to ask anybody to do it. You just need to try to figure out how to make it effective for you. And that's kind of some of the things that we're probably going to talk about the rest of the way. But that's the main thing, is like it's just so simple. The decisions are complex, but the process is simple.
And just to kind of tag onto that really quick, I think and correct me if I'm wrong here, but really where a lot of the differences are between kind of some of the traditional sim labs and the tactical decision games is that the value of the decision games is the you're forced in a time compressed environment. You have to make a decision. You can't say, well, I might do this and it depends on this. Like you have to make a decision, and you have to pick a path, and there's ripple effects to decisions, which that's like the natural kind of inherent part of the fireground. Is you're gonna like with Gary Klein's work, when you arrive to something, your brain is going to kind of identify a pattern. It's going to quickly predict a course of action, set a course, like run that quick mental simulation. If it seems like it'll work, you go, and you kind of figure out along the way. So you're kind of like ping ponging and pivoting along the way a little bit as you go. And the tactical decision game kind of forces that in a training environment versus a lot of the sim lab stuff. It's more of like let's come up with a bunch of different options. It's a little bit ambiguous. You're never really forced to actually have to make a decision and then see the outcomes of that. Is that kind of how you
That
see it?
Yeah, that's part of it for sure. Where I think one is that in a tactical discussion, right? So we've all been involved with them at the kitchen table. When you start having tactics discussion, you start out with a basement fire in a one-story house, one-story house that has a basement, right? You start talking about that, and within 15 minutes, you're going to a strip mall with a ordinary construction. Like it just you bird walk all over the place, and those are super fun
Mm-hmm.
discussions. You can certainly learn a lot. So what the TDG does is it focuses it. One of the essential components is that you have this, that the scenario is whatever we're talking about, or whatever the TDG is based on. If it's based on a two-story single family residence, that's the fire we're going to be talking about. We're not going to, we might what if some things like what if you discover this hydrant doesn't work, or some things like that that are realistic within the scenario. But you're not going to throw like, well, what if a plane lands on it, or some, like, it's not, you're not what ifing to that level. You're what ifing some very minor things. But the baseline is that the scenario is realistic, it's relevant to the audience, and you can even design them with specific learning goals. And for example, if you wanted to sort of determine within your organization what people consider to be a 2.5 fire versus an 1.75 fire, you put a series of these together, say 6 or 8 of them, with relatively similar building sizes. Wouldn't have to be exact, but then you start putting fires in them, and you grade the fires, like make it worse and worse and worse, or use even the same building and just put a bigger fire in it for different audiences. And then over the course of that time, all of a sudden people are going to switch from being like, these are 1.75 fires and these are 2.5 fires, right?
Mhm.
And
That's
so
that's that's
now,
funny
once you
because I'm
have that, now you can say, well, now we can train new officers and say, hey,
yeah.
what would you do with this fire? Why would you choose that line? Like, when we get to this, we could even, because we might be taking somebody who doesn't have very much expertise. At first, we could directly tell them, hey, we consider these to be 1.75 fires, and we consider these to be 2.5 fires, and give them examples. And then another set of TDGs with different buildings later. Then you could exercise that knowledge, and you could say, hey, what would you do in this situation? And see how closely their actual decisions match to the doctrine, right? So the first thing you're doing is you're giving them doctrine. This is how the organization sees this thing. And then the second thing you're doing is you're putting them in a position to make an actual decision, and you'd like to see that their choices mimic or closely resemble the doctrine. But where you could really challenge them then, and now we're talking about some significant knowledge of how to put together TDGs, but you would deliberately, if you had a group of, say, 10 officers, like I used to do this with my officer meetings, like I'm deliberately picking one that half of the group is going to go 1.75 and the other half's going to go 2.5. And we're going to have a really rich discussion about how that decision is made, why that decision is made. We're probably, from that group of 10 officers, going to pull out 3 or 4 real world examples from their memory of the choices they've made in the past and how those impacted their decision making today. And so when they start, like, as a chief officer, it's easy to go in and go, this is what I think you should do, right? And there's a lot of training that's what it is. But when I can get the officers or the firefighters or the drivers to say, here's how I think about that, and somebody else that's a peer says, well, we had a fire like that, but it turned out like this. And so in the future, I decided I would do this. The value that brings to that learning environment, in my mind, is almost incalculable, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking about peer-to-peer training, and all that stuff can be done based on how you. I mean, you can literally take the same scenario and just put the fire in a different place, or make the fire bigger or smaller, or change the arrival order, say go from first engine, second engine, first truck to first engine, first truck, second engine, like apparatus positioning, and it starts to impact all that stuff at the very um, the first in company officer decision making level. Like even how you position your apparatus so that when you're stretching hose, right, it's a lot easier if the tailboard is pointed, the easiest if it's pointed at the objective, the second easiest if it's 90 degrees to the objective, and the worst is when you have to come out the back of the rig and pull the hose forward. So being able to visualize that stuff in a TDG and say, hey, where would you position and why would you position that way? If they position backwards, and then you can see it's not going to work, but you could also just take them out on the drill ground then and go, okay, let's do it this way, let's do it this way, and then let's do it this way. And then you'll be able to go, oh my God, it's so much. If I just turn the rig 90 degrees, I'm so much more effective, right? And so all of that can be done. And I'm expanding out, right? Just because, one, I'm really excited about this stuff, and two, I think there's just so much application that can be done by the individual listener today, that if they pursue this stuff, they can become not only an excellent trainer, but provide excellent training to their peers, honestly, their supervisors, and certainly anybody who reports to them.
Yeah,
The thing,
go ahead, Nick.
the thing that jumped out to me immediately when you were talking, Chief, was that this can really help address the tacit knowledge transfer problem that when we had Dr. Preston Klein on a few episodes ago, that I like that you use the 1.75 versus 2.5 example, because it's very much along the same lines as when he spoke about, well, how hot is hot, and when is it too hot, or when he talked about that. And it's along the same lines, with that tacit knowledge of 1.75 versus 2.5, because in the fire service we're notorious for having these taglines like, oh, big fire, big water. Well, what is big fire? To an inexperienced firefighter that doesn't have that rich depth of experience, what is that threshold of big fire? And you can create that example and simulate those slides to put in their mental slide deck of what that big fire is that would necessitate that 2.5, and you can show those examples that replicate actual fires that you've been to or the department has been to, that people can then speak on. So to me, that immediately jumped out as a way to help bridge that gap.
Well, and that's absolutely the gold that you're digging for, right? Is that it's the stuff that people know, right? So when you make when you're so that first essential component is the scenario has to be realistic, right? You want it applicable, and you can make those things in Sims, right? You can use Sims You Share or some of the other software. You can make those Sims, but you're right. One of the things that's beautiful about the modern era is like you can just find videos. I mean, if you want a apartment fire, if you want a house fire, if you want I mean, I've got one where it's a UPS storage facility or UPS logistics facility. It's on fire, right? Like I mean, you can find virtually anything you want, and then you just take that and make that the training. And so, if I want to do 10 house fires, I just find 10 where we're talking about first in decision making. It's generally better if you don't have a bunch of companies deployed and all that kind of stuff. Although that stuff works well if you want to have you want to train chief officers assuming command of events, it's totally fine to have companies deployed because that's the real world, right? That's where the chiefs come in and take over. So, but the Sims work fine. Drawing, I mean, you can draw. I mean, you can draw a picture on a napkin in a bar. And if you have the right mindset for how to do this training and how to sort of guide the discussion, you can have a very rich discussion about any component of that fire operation that you want to have. And if you learn to put people under just a little bit of emotional pressure, which, trust me, you can do in the classroom environment. And you can do it when you're doing, when they say, well, maybe I would do this, maybe you do that, like, go, no, Lieutenant, what are you going to do? And
Mm-hmm.
literally force them to choose. Then now we've chosen, right? And once you've chosen, now we can analyze the decision and understand how that decision was made. So it's really getting to the decision and then going back and trying to understand how it was made. And so the scenario's a piece of the puzzle, right? You need a little bit of time pressure when when I'm delivering these, I'll give 30 seconds or a minute. It just sort of depends on the scenario. And you want people, but when it's time, and then they actually give orders, right? So when they arrive, you need them to, whatever your normal, like, do their size up, do their radio comms, and you don't have to use a radio, but you can. You can use a block of wood. What's important is that they engage mentally, that they're talking on the radio. If you want to learn and then give orders to the second arriving engine or give orders to the first arriving truck or whatever that is, each of those things is a skill set, right? So giving orders on the radio is a skill set. Formulating orders in your mind is a skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Communicating them effectively is a skill set. And so you're making all those decisions, then you're communicating those decisions in a time compressed way, like you would on the fire ground. Now we're just going to take our time and we're going to use guided reflection to talk about the decisions that were made, how they were made, all of the underlying tacit knowledge that those people have. And it gives us a chance to do sets and reps at low cost, highly repeatable. The time element, can be short, 5, 6, 7 minutes. I could take a group of officers, do one tactical scenario, and easily burn through 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it just all depends on what you're trying to accomplish and your skill level at being the trainer. And that's the piece that sort of is uh, the goal piece is the experience of being the facilitator, which you can only develop by being the facilitator. You're going to make
Yeah.
mistakes. You're going to you're going to you're going to accidentally face palm people or dismiss them or do all of these things that are just bad habits. But until you do them in the training environment and somebody calls you out on it, or you self-reflect and go, oh man, I wish I hadn't said. I mean, I've had to go back and apologize to people after TDGs and say, hey man, I'm really sorry that happened, right? I'm really sorry. I made a mistake. I apologize, but you get better if you do them and you have some feedback.
And I'll say, just to kind of, because we're going to ask about, the critical components of a TDG, which is, kind of what separates them a lot from the simulations. But I'll just kind of preface it with the value, my personal value that I have found from these when they really started to click was the ability to take my crew, like, right, you guys are cooking breakfast, all that kind of stuff, getting ready for the day, and we'll do find a building, like an apartment complex or something like that, and I'll just find a video of a fire that the building looks kind of similar to the building we want to do the TDG on, and we have just a quick, arrival video of that, and and I'll pull up on, we have this program First Do, but it's our pre-plans and stuff, and it kind of utilizes Google Earth, right? So I have like Google Earth open on one, and then I got the video, and we go through, and we're able to run this TDG. It takes us 15 minutes to go through. We're likening it to a building in our area, so there's no what if and all that kind of stuff. Everybody is looking at the same fire, and then we go through the process. And it's funny because it dawned on me one day, there's that whole, it'll come up every once in a while, the Blue Angels, when the Blue Angels are sitting there like in a conference room flying their planes, together. And I'm watching my crew go through this, and we're like, oh shoot, this is like the fire department version of the Blue Angels sitting in their chairs, kind of visualizing stuff together. And we're going through this TDG process and making decisions. And over time, the benefit that I have found from it has been it shows me you don't know what you don't know, especially as an officer. You don't always know where your gaps are. And so it shows me where the gaps are that we need to train on, of like, oh, we haven't talked about positioning enough, or we're on different pages here. And when we get somebody new to our crew, it allows them to kind of come into our thought loop as a crew in a much faster way, much more efficient way. I could not possibly take somebody and sit them down and paint out explicitly every single situation and every single expectation. It takes tons of time, but the speed up that it's given us to be able to bring somebody in, even probationary folks, and there's just something about when you are in the room, kind of in that hive mind, and you're like listening to people make decisions, and there's so much intuitive knowledge that you're gaining from that, and people just kind of adapt right into the hive that's already existing. And like, holy smokes, we're getting people spun up super fast by doing 15 minutes of TDGs every morning. And that fits a busy company schedule. But like you said, the value, and I think the critical piece is a moderator that knows the difference between a TDG and a simulation. And so can you detail out what those critical components are of a TDG? We talked about time compression, but there's a few critical components. So can you kind of paint that picture for people?
Right. So we're always starting with a scenario, right? So you want it to be realistic to the people, the audience that you have. The type of building, the hydrant or locations or lack of hydrants, the long driveway, whatever is normal for your department. And there's a lot of different normals, right? Even within organizations, there's a lot of building construction is different in different districts and all that kind of stuff, right? So as long as it's close enough, and that's what you've discovered. Like I have one where it's like a flea bag motel, and I can go to almost any agency and just look on Google Maps for 2-star hotels and just change the address, and it's their hotel that they know where the fentanyl is sold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like it's not perfect, but it's like you said, it's close enough, and that's the fidelity piece. Close enough is close enough, right? So that's the first is a scenario. The time pressure comes by just only limiting the amount of time. Once you put them in the hot seat, and you're not actually putting one person, like if you've got 5 people in the room, you want everybody to make the decision. You want every single person to be the first in, or to be the driver, or whatever you're training, right? Well, I'll just sort of stick with first in officers. Everybody who's in the room is going to create they're going to think about their size up, their apparatus positioning, the hose deployments. They're going to have to plan all that stuff. And um, typically, when I start a class, I'll ask for volunteers. But by the second TDG, I'm just calling on people cold, right? So, like, there's no pressure like being in a group of peers and having somebody just go, "Hey, you're on the hot seat right now. You're arriving right now. Give me your radio report. Give me your radio report and your orders for the second engine and the first truck in that order right now." And it's like engine one is at where, and I give them the address and stuff. You want to what you want in the scenario, give them the information they would normally have. There's always going to be some ambiguity and some information that you don't give them, but you want to try and give them as much information as they would normally have if they're arriving, particularly if you're training novices, right? The challenge is already there. So that's how you create that time pressure is make them give radio reports, and radio traffic is one of those components, right? Is like actually talking on the radio is a skill set, and you have to practice that skill set if you want to be good at it. Giving orders that are timely, relevant, accurate, that they communicate the minimum information necessary for that other person to understand what you need them to do. And people go, "Oh, we have SOGs for all that stuff." It's like they're not complete enough. you'd have to write a novella for every single type of fire if you wanted to cover and then now people are trying to remember what the book says, and it just doesn't work like that. So there's the scenario, the time pressure, the decision points, right? You, you want those to be challenging relative to the skill set of the people who are doing your audience, right? I'm not taking a brand new battalion chief, although I would actually take a brand new battalion chief. Their first scenario wouldn't be a Mayday, but if I had them for a day, they'd be doing a Mayday by the end, because that's a realistic, like, if you're a chief officer, that's a real now there's a lot of pressure there, right? So I wouldn't start with that, but I'd certainly get there relatively quickly. And then that's all, like, as you know, Jay, that whole part of the puzzle is probably 5 minutes or less.
Yeah,
And
it's
then we
quick.
get those decisions, we get the radio traffic, you put it up on the board, whatever you're using. You draw the pictures on the whiteboard. Here's where the apparatus park. You use a blue line and say, here's where the line gets laid, and you just create a little visual that everybody can see for how the first decision maker set up. And then you just talk about that through guided reflection, the strengths and weaknesses of that approach, what challenges would that approach, where would that approach be most likely to fail? There's a lot of questions you can ask, and the key to learning the facilitation piece is to ask good open-ended questions that aren't leading, that get the person in their mind to give you their reasoning. And once they start giving you their reasoning, now you can look for opportunities to ask other members about that reasoning. There's just and that's the whole skill I said about learning to facilitate these things. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to be directive. Like, you really don't want to come in and say, well, how would you do it, and then go, that's wrong. Right? You
Hmm.
don't want to say that's wrong, you should do it like this. If you had a way you wanted them to do it, you should have told them up front. Right? If you want to deliver doctrine, but don't pretend that you're letting them make decisions and then cut them off at the knee. So that's the the scenario, the time pressure, the fact that you're making decisions, right? So you have to have these decision points in mind, the radio traffic, and then the guided reflection, right? And so the whole thing, if you do a, like you said, Jay, you can do 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you can do an hour. When I do a full day, each one of these scenarios, we have to take a break afterwards, because you're so mentally engaged. If you're doing it right, the students are so engaged. Like, Jay, your people are going to a fire at the beginning of each shift. They're going to a fire. And people go, oh, well, it's just a sim. But the evidence shows that later that day, your mind cannot distinguish between, if it's done right, the training environment and the real environment. Your mind puts them together. And so that's both the power and the need to not make it one of the, like we've sort of danced around it, but one of the problems with sim based training in my experience is that much of it is what you would call garden path training, right? So there's a way through the garden, there's a way through the sim. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step right, 1 step forward, 1 step left, 1 step back. Like, whatever that path is that the designer of the scenario has decided in advance is the correct way to do
Hmm.
it. And once you've been through it, I mean, it's like playing Frogger, man.
Hmm.
Like, you just got to push the joystick around, and so the learning is, like, the first time through it might have some reasonable value, but by the time once you figure out the pattern, man, you're just walking the path. I mean, you've got a guided tour through the fire, and that's just not how fires go. And so to me, that's sort of the downside of the Sims. I mean, besides the fact that they're hard to create, they take a lot of time, they're expensive. Like, there's a lot of negatives, but the main one is that I think that the relative value of the learning is significantly diminished, and that's just my experience.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest, the biggest hurdles in when people think of these things. That's what they immediately go to is either the experiences with simulations during assessment centers, or we any number of these different simulation settings where it's essentially you're just reading off a script instead of actually making decisions, and you're just checking the boxes. And like you said, as long as you stay along that path, you're going to get to the end. But there really isn't any value. All it just shows is that you can memorize um, a sequence of events that are supposed to happen in theory, instead of actually making real-time decisions. So I think that's where the one of the other major values of this is your that the time compression and making specific, tactically oriented decisions. This and it's appropriate to the level. I like the fact that you delineated between the practicality and the relevance of not just the building stock, the resources, but also the rank and skill level and experience level of the participants too. So that's where I think that moderation is so key. And I know you touched on some of it already, but I want to pull the thread a little bit more because it's so critical. And I think that we vastly underestimate this the social stress and anxiety that comes with being in these settings amongst peers, because to be honest with you, that could be some of the most intimidating and stress provoking things that we do is having to be put in the hot seat in front of our fellow firefighters. So that inherently creates a lot of that stress factor to begin with. So what are some of the potential landmines, and how can we uh, sidestep them and get maximum value when we're moderating these TDGs? And how can we best facilitate the radio traffic and the giving of these orders?
Yeah, so I mean, the radio traffic piece I think is almost the easiest part. Is that you in when you're setting up the scenario, you're saying, "Hey, here's what you have to do," right? So you have the decision points. You're going to be first to arrive. You have to give it. You have to determine where you're going to position your apparatus. You have to be ready to do a size up report, and immediately following the size up, you must give orders to the second arriving engine, which is engine two, and the first arriving ladder, which is ladder five. Now, here we go. Here's the fire. Take 30 seconds and be ready to answer those questions, right? And so we've defined, and you can even write that up on the board or whatever, but you're defining what you need them to accomplish. If you call on them, here's what they need to do, right? And that's where we give them a little bit of time, but the pressure is applied when you call on them. And so, there is, and this is part of the skill set of learning how to do these things, is that there are landmines, right? You don't want to. We already talked about one, which is having a predetermined outcome. Like you've already decided what everything's going to be. If that's you're trying to you dress doctrine up as tactical decision making. It's not the same thing. You should be ready for people to do things that you don't expect, and be very, very curious about why they're doing it, because it might be way more effective than you think. And you may have zero experience with whatever they're talking about, and you just think I mean, I'm rarely the smartest guy in the room, right? If I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room. um, you know, and if I want to figure out how my company officers think, I have to let them tell me how they think. I can't tell them how to think. That's just not going to work, right? But there are some pitfalls. Like you don't want to go to you don't want to pull a novice out the first time they're in the room and potentially embarrass them on their radio reports, right? But if I had somebody who had expressed an interest in being a company officer and they wanted to try some of these things, I definitely put them on the hot seat, and they might fumble, and you know and undoubtedly they're going to fumble, right? That's okay. Like there's no cost.
Hmm.
We can even go back and say, you know what? Let's stop right now. Let's go back in time, 30 seconds. think a little bit more about how you want to verbalize this and let me know when you're ready. And then go, okay, now you're writing. Boom. Let's start again. Right. I can just repeat it right now. Or I can just take the information. I can say, hey, I can just make a mental note. That wasn't great performance, even from an experienced company officer. Then I'll just make the mental note, but I'll ask some clarifying questions so that I can get the plan up on the board for us to talk about, because it's not just about being good on the radio, right? That's not necessarily the focus of the learning. But if I was developing professionals, right, whether they're paid or not paid, if I'm trying to develop professionalism in my organization, I would make mental note like, hey, that company officer needs a little bit of work on their radio comms, and I would professionally talk to them about that in private later. We'd probably go do some tutoring sessions. We can even do that on over Zoom or something like this. We don't have to be in the same place. And sometimes I've had people go, yeah, chief, I really screwed that up. I need to work on that a little bit. And like, awesome. Right. So that's one pitfall, is like you have the potential to embarrass people, and you should not do that, because I can guarantee you one thing. If you do that with a group, your learning is their engagement, their willingness to participate is going to drop off precipitously, uh, unless you apologize immediately, which, like I said, I've had to do, right? And so that's one pitfall. Another pitfall is you have somebody in the room, and this is a pitfall I think for any class. But somebody in the room who just wants to dominate the discussion, like their tactics are the best tactics and nobody else's has tactics as good as theirs. Like, and you need to include them, but you want to just professionally not let them dominate the discussion. I always, if I'm doing a group, especially when I was still working in Seattle, I'd think about the group that was coming in. Who are my subject matter experts? Like, there's people that, like, if I need to know about hose stuff, like, why wouldn't I call on Aaron Fields or Matt Lujan, right? I mean, but I'm probably not going to go to them first because they are so good at what they do. And so now I might go to them first, but you just have to think about who the experts are and who the novices are, and how you're going to leverage the knowledge of the expert and the learning ability of the novice to the best advantage. And some of that's just the skill of the facilitator. And once you've done a few of these and you start doing some self-reflection, you're just going to figure out how to get better, how to ask better questions. I still end up asking yes or no questions, which are terrible. Would you do this thing? Yes. Well, there's no discussion there, right? Why would you do this thing? Is really the point. And then there's also some risk if you have a wide discrepancy between ranks. So, my organization had, firefighter, lieutenant, captain, battalion, deputy, right? If I've got relatively new lieutenants in the room and I've got a deputy in the room, I want to be very careful about letting the deputy say what's right and what's wrong, because for two reasons. One, they can rapidly shut down any sort of actual discussion of the merits of any particular idea. Two, I've also discovered that sometimes they are not as current on what the doctrine of the organization is as some of the company officers might be, and they can embarrass themselves pretty badly if they're not up to date on what the latest methodology is for doing. Exterior water would be a great example. Like, as that change was made, an organization started to adopt that, I could easily be in a situation where maybe the most senior member of the organization just is out of step with the way that the training division is instructing people now, right? I mean, that's possible. So those are all pitfalls that are, I think they're present in any class that you're going to give, but they're heightened in TDGs because there is the social pressure. There is the value of the learning, and the engagement is really, really high, like Jay attested to. And So then the risks of those things also are attenuated up as well. And so the skill of facilitator becomes, but developing that skill is something that every single listener can do. Everybody out there can do this. Like you can figure it out. We smart people in the fire service, right? If you're smart and dedicated and you're interested in getting better, you're going to get better, and you're going to learn. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from them, and you're going to do better. And before long, you're going to go, "Wow, that was a great training session." You know,
Yeah, I remember going through a TDG, one of your TDG classes, and um, you were asking a guy a question, why'd you in the debrief after, right? So we went through the TDG, and then you start going through the debrief after, and um, you go, why did you make this decision? The guy kind of goes, I don't know. And you go, well, make the argument for it and make the argument against it. And it was like, I've never heard anybody ask that before, ask somebody to think through that before, right? And you just kind of pulled the thread out, and you could see the guy kind of like, okay. And he starts working through the process. He's just kind of working out loud. And I'm like, holy smokes, there was so much knowledge gained just because you pulled the thread a little farther than just letting it go. Yeah, I don't know. Or you like a dead end answer, and you go, well, compare this one versus this one, right? Like there's a pro, because a lot of times the difference, it's always easy to tell the difference between right and wrong. It's right and almost right. Or like when you have three options that are kind of similar and they all would probably work, what makes you go towards this one versus this one? And getting to the root of the decision being made and why you, I think that's what a skilled moderator can do in a TDG is get somebody to break down, why they, of the three options that would all work, why'd you go this way? And what would have happened if we would have gone this way? And to be able to kind of tease those out in the debrief afterwards, that's where a lot of the learning comes from. And there's always this with a lot of the TDGs, I think there's this natural inclination of like some of the senior guys will back up and go, well, the junior guys, they got to learn, they got to make these decisions. You're like, hold up a second. While yes, that is true, there's a ton of value in what our department's been doing this week is going through TDGs. There's a ton of value in seeing a senior guy who has seen that fire a few times. When you watch them make the decisions through the process, you're in the room with them and you're listening to their decisions being made, boom, 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 and then you debrief afterwards. The institutional knowledge pass on, that tacit knowledge transfer is just kicked into hyperdrive. And we kind of a lot of times I don't want to say let the senior guys get away with, but we sometimes focus so much on the junior end that we don't realize that there's an immense value in a junior guy listening to a senior guy make decisions and running that fire with him, quote unquote, during that simulation and being like, okay, that makes sense. I watched him make that decision. I see why he did that. You're watching somebody ride a bike and you're seeing their body adjust to the bike as they're riding the bike. You're like, okay, I get it. You're not just telling somebody to jump on the bike and take off and watch them crash. You're watching somebody else ride the bike and you're just kind of picking up all these cues along the way.
yeah, the tacit knowledge that your senior people have and pulling that out of them. I mean, I don't know an organization right now. Everywhere I go to teach, people are like, oh, we have all these new people. Like, yeah, you do, right? And so, unless you're on the busiest companies in the busiest places of the busiest cities, you're not going to get enough sets and reps to. I mean, nobody is, and even in some of those places, they're highly skilled at a very particular type of building. Or, I mean, I'm an expert in high-rise tenement fires, or that sort of thing, right? And that's what they go to those a lot. They have tons of experience in them, but I can just tell you from doing this that I take I have a pretty big group of pretty big group of battalion chiefs from all battalions and deputies from all over the country, and I take somebody from a major city and give them a tactical decision problem where they have two people on a company, and the companies arrive in 3-minute intervals, and there's no hydrants. They're a novice. They're a novice at that, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they have like literally less than, I mean, the probie at that volunteer company knows more about that operation than that battalion chief from that big city. And there's this brought now we go, wait, that's not really what it's doing. Is it's I'm using all the people I'm doing this with in that group are experts, right? And so my goal there is to stretch their expertise and to get them outside of their comfort zone. I mean, I'm doing that deliberately. I'm just saying that, what the right answer is highly dependent on where you are, which is why you need the scenario to be relevant. And, that gets back to, like, you buy a big group of simulations from somebody, how many of them are accurate to the building stock and the operations of your fire department? Do their scenarios that they've created, if you have 3-person staffing and they have 4-person staffing, that's different. If you have 2-person staffing and they have 4-person staffing, that's even more different, right? And so, they've created, most of them have created a garden path that you can't walk in the real, it's not possible for you to walk in the real world. And I had, right, I'm 7 years retired now, but I felt like I was a fairly competent incident commander in the way that the Seattle Fire Department did things. But Seattle has a big army, right? They're sending 45 people to a house fire, and the units arrive with 4 highly motivated, well-trained, well-equipped people who are, highly physically capable because of the type of training that they get from experts like Aaron Fields. I mean, that's who's giving our recruits their host training, right? And that's across the organization, right? So that's my mental model to do things. And I was pretty competent in understanding when I needed second alarms or third alarms, and how to deal with the bus routes and the cops and like all that kind of stuff. But that knowledge base is specific to that city at that time, right? They've changed a lot of stuff since I left, right? If I went back there, I wouldn't be a novice, but I certainly wouldn't be an expert. And so this is where one of the beautiful things about TDGs is that I really am a fan of the idea that all tactics is local. You can learn and you can change and you can adapt based on what you're doing in your organization. And certainly your organization and your immediately adjacent organization should be, pretty tight in the way that you operate. But that's wildly different between, Nixa, Missouri, or North Powder, Oregon, than it is from the FDNY or Miami. It's just, they're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I want to just quickly circle back to, because I think there's tremendous value in the framing of the question, or the follow-up, and I think the importance of the guided discussion after the steps are taken and the actions are taken that were prescribed for the TDG, is that debrief and the crafting of the pointed follow-up questions. And I the one that Jay brought up, I think is such a brilliant way of framing a question to really get somebody to critically evaluate their thought process. And it's devil's advocate of explain why you made that decision, but also, explain why it wouldn't potentially be a good decision. So having to frame it both ways is either going to bolster their original choice or get them to realize, hey, there actually might be a better choice, or hey, this wasn't a good choice, but they're doing it on their own. That's you're essentially priming them to critically think and to provide to walk themselves down the path. So it's not, you're not giving them the answer or your opinion. You're getting them to come to figure that out themselves. And I think there's so much value in that, and that's only going to strengthen their competency and their understanding of how our tactics actually work, and how the environment is going to respond, or how relevant it is given the circumstances that that individual environment is in, whether that's, you said, the staffing or the building stock, because that's those tactics are going to be local. So I think that is such a key point to bring up, and how much intentionality there has to be in making sure that you're providing you're teeing the participants up with those questions to get them to think, and pulling on those threads is so much of how this is going to be a successful venture.
Yeah, and part of that, so part of that skill set, right, is asking the right questions in the right order, and finding places to dig in and burrow deeper into the thought making. But there's also a piece, so you have everybody do the thing, right? So everybody makes decisions. You pick one person, put them on the hot seat, and get their plan up on the board so that so we have something to talk about. Then we're gonna break that down, and that discussion, depending on the richness of the discussion, might last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. As a facilitator, what you want to do is you don't want to try to wring every ounce of gold out of there. What you want to do is you want to maintain a high level of, you want to get all of the big nuggets and most of the pretty good sized nuggets. But if you're picking up little tiny nuggets, you move on, right? You,
Mm-hmm.
you want the discussion to be main, like as soon as you feel like the energy of the discussion is trailing off, you have two options. One, if you're trying to do something short, like Jay was talking about, you would just end it there, and move on to the next thing for the day. We spent 10 minutes doing it, we're on our way, right? But the next thing that you would do is then just if you wanted to keep it going, you would just pick somebody else, start them right at the beginning, erase the engines and the hoses and everything from your whiteboard, and they start right from, okay, you're arriving right now, give me your size up, your apparatus positioning, your first right, like you get them right back to the very beginning, and their plan is going to be a little bit different than the other plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you don't have as long or as rich of a discussion, but you're going to get a couple of big pieces of gold out of there, and then you're going to wrap up. And honestly, if you do that then when I say a complex scenario, I don't mean complexity in the physicality of doing it. It's a simple design, but if the decision making is complex, we can easily burn through an hour doing that for just a standard 1 or 2 story single family residential fire, with the fire on whatever floor you want to put it on. I mean, there's just a lot of complexity to the decisions that you're making, and if you guide the discussion well, and you maintain, you maintain the energy in the room and those things that are sort of baseline instructor things, but things you get better at, you'll just become a better facilitator. All of a sudden you'll realize, like, oh my God, I let the energy in the room drop to almost zero. Like
Mm-hmm.
and you go, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And you just get better. And sort of the untold story here is that by creating these TDGs and delivering these TDGs and um, becoming good at doing it, not only are you making really good firefighters and company officers, not only is the training really, really good, but you individually become much, much better at those decisions, right? And at doing it after action review,
Mm-hmm.
um, asking a person, got somebody who's having a personnel problem, right? Like the influence it has in the way that you can um, manage the rest of your interactions as an officer, as a member of the fire department, just professionalizes in a lot of other ways.
Well, and I'll say this, that some of the effects that I've seen, the TDG impact it's had so far for us, that I was there's a lot of like effects that happen. You're like, I didn't see this coming. That and this is an awesome, side benefit to this. So like for our training division, as we're doing this, we're able to go through, 4 platoons worth of TDGs. This is just kind of how we've implemented it, right? So I've got like my crew level. They're the guinea pigs, the crash test dummies. We work through a bunch of that stuff. Well, then we go to the department level and we start the train division with our engine truck community. We start pushing these out. We kind of base them on building types. We did apartment fires this week, and we'll do like big box soon. Well, anyways, when you're going through these, there's obviously the benefit to the direct participants of the TDG, but there's the benefit to the training division where we're able to identify gaps and trends, and we're able to capture like good things to pass on so that everybody can benefit of it. And then there's also the when you're planning out areas of need, like we need to target this, you're able to see them pop up in the TDGs and go, oh shoot, we're all over the place with whatever that you're seeing these inconsistencies pop up, and if you track them and trend them, you can go, okay, next year we need to develop an emphasis on training apparatus positioning or whatever it is, right? You got a new crop of drivers come through, and you catch these things early in the TDG process if you're looking for them before they have a chance to have to before you have to catch them in the field. And so that's been a huge probably side benefit that I've found from the TDGs right now, department wide, going, okay, this is worth its weight in gold, because your alternative is you start catching them on fires, which nobody's going to enough fires to have them pop up like that, right? So you're going to be slower behind the 8 ball, so you accelerate your departmental kind of learning process of where your gaps are.
Yeah, and if you like, if I have a group of officers, right? So if I have 10 officers, which is fairly common in Seattle for a battalion to have 8 to 10 officers, right? And I put them in a decision making scenario, and I do one of these TDGs, and I get wildly varying answers for how we're going to solve this problem. Uh, what you're identifying, Jay, is like we're really inconsistent. And
Mm-hmm.
so we might feel like we have a very common understanding of how we're going to do business, but the thing to understand, people go, well, like that officer wouldn't make that decision on the fire ground, and it's like the evidence shows exactly the opposite, right? And if I have an officer who makes an egregious, what I would consider to be sort of an egregious decision, um, and even their reasoning that they offer me is not good. We can talk about that as a pitfall, even. Um, my first assumption shouldn't be that it's just that officer. My assumption should be that unless that officer missed some critical piece of training that every other officer in my organization has, then I should assume that at least some, if not all or most, at least some big percentage of my officers uh, would make, given the same set of circumstances, would make the same decision. And now I have something that I can go, okay, do we have doctrine? Have we, um, do we even have doctrine? If not, how are we going to create it? What's the doctrine we want to have, right? If we have doctrine, is it accurate? Are we communicating it effectively? Like that might be a doctrine question, or it might be just a training question. It just depends on the situation. But what I've been able to do is identify, right? Even if I can figure out, oh, it's just that officer, well, that officer needs a better mental model than they currently have, and we can work on that, right? It gives me areas where I can help improve my people, so that and trust me, we did apparatus positioning, but because we were challenged with it, and once we did a few TDGs on just focus on apparatus positioning, all of a sudden you got to the street and it's like, oh my God, that every apparatus is where it should be for the most effect, not where I think it should be, but for the most effect, most positive impact on this incident where this fire is within this event, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, yeah, I think the benefits there, and do it, and you can do them online, like Jay, your series that I ran through Fire Nuggets, right? Is 4 TDGs over basically 4 weeks with groups of officers from a pretty broad range of organizations. And so you're learning from each other. In that case, you're learning from people who are in other areas of the country. So I think there's a lot of value to be gained here. And that's why I'm so passionate about trying to get that information out.
Well,
We're absolutely going to take advantage of that passion, and this conversation has been tremendous, and I think it's going to set the stage beautifully for part two of this discussion, because this will be a two-parter where the next one will sit down with Chief Jose again, and he'll be able to share his screen, and we could actually walk through the sequence and see, how he crafts these TDGs and give an actual example of how this is actually going to be carried out in real time. So looking forward to that part two where we can actually dive into the execution side of these TDGs.
Great.
So
Thanks,
Chief,
Nick. I really appreciate you, Jay, having me on, and any chance to talk about tactics is going to make my day.
absolutely, I hear you. Well, Chief, I can't thank you enough for taking your time out and sharing your expertise with us. And we're looking forward to linking back up again for the second installment here. So to everyone tuning in, I'll see you at the next episode of the Framework Podcast. And take care and stay frosty.